Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about setting up feeding and sleeping schedules for your foster baby or young toddler. Now, a lot of you have been asking me questions about specifics with foster babies and toddlers, so I thought a lot of you would find this very useful. It's also a great thing that you can plan while you're waiting for a placement. So this is actually something that I did because if you're like me and maybe a little bit type A, I like to have a plan in place. I like to have something to start with when I have a new placement because I knew it was going to be overwhelming enough having a new placement and learning all the things. I knew it would be helpful to have kind of a starting point when it came to feeding and sleeping schedule, like something I could kind of use as my framework and adjust as needed. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you guys about today. I'm going to give you all my tips and tricks on feeding schedules, sleeping schedules. I'm also going to leave a ton of links below of some resources you can research yourself, because I definitely don't believe you should ever just take one person's advice. You should do your own research. You should make what's best for your family and make those decisions best you can for yourselves. So I highly recommend doing your own research. I did study nutrition in college, so I definitely have some knowledge, but I'm by no means an expert or a pediatrician, so definitely keep that in mind. If you have not watched my previous video about bonding with your foster baby, I highly recommend watching that before this video. In that video, I talk about the importance of building that trust with your baby and letting them know that you're going to feed them when you're hungry, you're going to let them sleep when they're sleepy, and just building that trust that first few days, those first few weeks, and those first few months. Because it's really important that they know that you're a safe place and that you're going to take care of them right from the get-go. The sooner they can bond with you, the better they will be off developmentally, and y'all will be off emotionally as well. So definitely I recommend watching that and taking that into consideration as you're watching this video. Once again, this is just going to be a framework and something to kind of start with, but you will adjust as needed based on the baby you get, because no baby is going to need the same things. They all have different experiences, they all have different needs, and that's just something to consider when you're creating a schedule. Okay, so a couple things you want to consider for the schedule. One is your own schedule. Are they going to be in daycare? Are they going to be with you at home? What things do you need to plan around it? Because at the end of the day, it's going to have to fit into your life, because this is also your life. So that's one thing you need to consider. And the other thing is what's going to be developmentally appropriate for their age and their experiences and where they are. All right, so those are the things that I want you to think about when you're planning these schedules. So I want to talk about feeding first. So under 12 months of age, generally, their main source of nutrients is going to be from formula. Obviously, since they're foster babies, breastfeeding is not generally an option. I've heard of a few foster parents getting permission to use banks or breastfeeding themselves, but I would say that those cases are very far in between, and most situations do not allow that. So you can usually bet on that you're going to be formula feeding a baby younger than 12 months. That being said, the first thing I want to talk about really briefly is selecting your formula. Now, if you happen to know what the baby was on before, I highly recommend continuing to use whatever they were on. It's just good for their digestive system not to have different kinds of formulas going in and out. So if you happen to be lucky enough to know what they were on before, definitely I would recommend at least starting with that and trying to continue to use it. A lot of times you don't have any information at all on where these babies are coming from or what they've been used to eating or how often. Usually you are basically going into this blind, so a lot of times you won't have that information. If you don't have that information, my next recommendation is to get a formula that has basically a limited amount of ingredients and good ingredients. You will be really surprised if you start reading the back of baby formulas what is in some of them and which ones are actually better than others. So you might think the one that looks like it's from a happy farm and organic is healthier than some of the other ones, but that might be the case, but it also might not. So definitely don't just be fooled by the propaganda on baby formula. Definitely read the fine print. Make sure that it has all the nutrients you think a baby should need in there. You can research that yourself. If y'all are interested in an in-depth video on baby nutrition, I can definitely make that for you. But I definitely did my research on that a lot. And I really looked for formulas that weren't going to have ingredients like high fructose corn syrup and sugar and things like that. Obviously, babies do need some forms of fat and sugar, so you do need some of that in the formula, but just the sources that they're coming from and the quality of those sources is basically my point of what you're looking for in a formula. And like I said, sometimes it's the surprising formula to you. I'm sorry if you can hear my son in the background. He just went down for a nap and he's being a little bit anti-nap right now. So speaking of sleeping and feeding schedules, toddler life is a whole nother level from baby life. But anyway, okay, So for formulas, like I said, check the ingredients. Don't just assume what's on the label, and pick what seems right for your family or maybe what the baby was on before. So once you've selected your formula, then there's the question of how much. Now, once again, most likely you're going to have no idea how much this baby is used to eating. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. Personally, the way I like to do it is I started off by looking at the American Academy of Pediatrics, and they recommend having 2.5 ounces per pound per 24-hour period. So if you know your baby's weight, which you should within the first few days if you take them to the pediatrician, then you can kind of base it off that, and that will be your starting point. That is not your end goal necessarily. If that works for your baby, great, but it could be that they suck that down and act like they want more, and so maybe you need to increase the amount, or maybe you need to increase how often you're feeding them. Or it could also be that it's way too much and they wouldn't even finish half of it, and so maybe you need to decrease it or increase the time between your feedings. So once again, you're going to have to be flexible based on the baby that you get. But this just gives you a nice starting point of where you can start. So for what I did is I made a Google chart, like on Google Docs, or whatever word processing software you want, and I basically just kind of put like my starting points. So like 1 to 3 months, this is what I'm going to start with. 4 to 6 months, this is what I'm going to start with. And with younger babies, generally you feed them more often, so 2 to 3 hours, usually between feedings. Once again, some babies are going to need more than that, some are going to need less. So I just kind of put my starting point on there. I researched generally how much a 1-month-old baby weighs and how much a 2-month-old baby weighs, and just kind of put my starter number in there. That way I had something like the very first day that I could start with and adjust as needed. And I did that for every single age. So that just gave me like a nice little chart to start with formula. So that kind of gives you an idea of what you do with formula. But once you reach 6 months of age, then you're going to start adding things like water and finger foods and first baby foods and things like that. Now, once again, this will depend on the baby, but you're going to hear me say that a lot in this video. But some babies might start eating solids more closer to 4 months. Some might wait until they're 8 months old. It literally depends on the baby. Usually some signs to look for is they're able to sit up on their own. They have interest in food. They don't just thrust it out with their tongue. And just, how comfortable do you feel as a parent? There's definitely different ways to introduce baby foods. Some people are really into that baby-led weaning, which is where you kind of give them basically whole foods and watch them and let them figure it out. And then other people like to use baby purees, which is maybe the more traditional way of doing baby food. So it's up to you how you want to do that. As far as my recommendations for first foods, I definitely recommend starting with veggies. And I recommend buying from glass baby food jars. I personally just don't like the idea of my baby having lots of plastic and stuff in their jars and their containers and stuff. So I like to start out with glass, and usually organic if you can afford it. I know not everyone has that luxury. As a nutrition major, nutrition was very important to me, and it's something I wanted to invest in. So I definitely bought the higher end baby food, but you certainly don't have to do that. So that's kind of my recommendation for starting off with foods. And once again, you might get a 10-month-old baby who's never had food before. So, you have to keep that in mind, and you basically have to treat them like their very first time getting food. You shouldn't introduce too much food at once. Start with one for the first 3 days, and then try another one. That helps wean out allergies, any reactions to the food, and just helps their digestive system as they're getting new foods in. Because once again, you might get a 10-month-old that's never had food ever. So just keep that in mind, depending on the age of the baby you got. I got my son when he was 5 months old, so I was the first person to introduce him to foods as far as I know. And yeah, so just keep that in mind. Water, first foods, usually starts around 6 months of age, and you can adjust the formula intake based on how much they're eating. People usually say a good rule of thumb is a fist size of your baby, your baby's fist is how much they eat. I will say my son ate a whole lot more than that, so once again, depends on the baby. So there's that. You should also listen to any recommendations your pediatrician has, of course. They may offer to have a supplement. Depending on what kind of formula you're using, they might want you to supplement with it. They might also ask you to feed them more or less based on if they're gaining weight or not. So just keep that in mind. But once again, the forefront of your mind should be building that trust and making sure you're meeting that baby's needs overall. The schedule is nice to have and something you want to work towards, but the most important thing is that your baby is being fed and meeting their nutrition, and that they're building that trust with you. Okay. So that's basically my overall for the feeding schedule for younger babies. As they get older into like young toddlers, then you're going to want to start working on things like introducing cups, introducing utensils, plates, bibs, moving to a booster seat, and really that's going to be personal preference for you. In Montessori, babies start that at like 12 months of age or younger. Some people might wait until they're over 2. So for really, that's going to be a preference to you when you want them to start that. One thing to consider is generally sippy cups and bottles are considered bad for babies' teeth and can cause tooth decay. You're never supposed to leave a bottle or sippy cup in the baby's crib for both SIDS risk and tooth decay risk. So keep that in mind for sure. And I feel like I had another thought with that, but it just went away. So just keep those in mind when you are switching over to like what cups you're using. For me personally, I like to use the Munchkin or Nuke 360 cups. And then I also like to use like straw cups when babies are old enough. Both of those things are better for teeth. And I feel like it kind of helps them grow up to be big kids. So that's just what I did. You're up to do whatever you want. This is just kind of me throwing up my advice on you, basically. So that's kind of how I started and approached feeding for young babies and toddlers. I definitely also had a bunch of toddler meal ideas ready and on hand in case I got an older baby, 15, 16, 18 months old, or even a 2-year-old. So I definitely recommend having some like go-to meals ready just in case. You might even consider having some non-perishables like fruit cups or puffs in your cabinet ready to go. So if you get a big child like in the middle of the night or emergency placement, you have something in the cupboards. And yeah, so that's kind of basically all I did for feeding for kids. Now let's talk a little bit about sleeping. So for me, the sleep schedule kind of rotated around the feeding schedule. I tried to follow the babywise schedule where, you know, you have like the playtime and the eating time and the sleeping time and all of that like in like a rotation. So I kind of tried to do that, but mostly I just kind of did what worked for us and my baby and our schedule. So for me, I ended up just kind of following my child's lead on this. When he first came to me, he was only 5 months old. Now, for my experience, most 5 months old sleep in the morning and the afternoon and then at night. But it was very clear to me when I got him that he was not used to sleeping or eating that often. So he ended up being one of those babies that really wanted like a 4-hour stretch between his bottles, and he did not want a morning nap at all. Instead, he ended up just taking a really long afternoon nap. He took about a 4-hour afternoon nap for a really long time, really until he was 1.5, which is abnormal, but also normal for kids of trauma. They usually like sleep off their trauma. Not always, obviously there's plenty of trauma kids who don't sleep at all. So, but sometimes that is a symptom. So that's just what was my experience. I kind of just had to follow my kid's lead with that. But you can definitely kind of have an ideal schedule in place for you. Generally, babies under 1 are going to have at least 2 naps in the morning and the afternoon. Obviously, that wasn't my experience, but in general, that is the case. So you could kind of plan out like when you think they might have a bottle and when you think they might have a nap in the afternoon and the morning based on your schedule and their schedule. And then also like bedtime and nighttime. Usually babies get at least 12 hours of sleep at night, or they should. Obviously, some babies may have never been sleep trained and may not be used to sleeping at night at all. So you also should prepare for sleep training, which I will talk about in just a second. So just kind of have an idea of their sleep schedule and like where you think they want to nap. For older children, around 1 year old and older, may drop the morning nap and may just have a longer afternoon nap. Now, if your baby's happy with the 2 naps, there's no harm in keeping those 2 naps. I will say that if they go to a daycare, they generally will drop that nap at 1, unfortunately, and they'll have to go to the 1 afternoon nap. So, keep that in mind. So anyway, I know this video, I feel like I'm just splurting information everywhere and it's like all over the place, but really everything really is so dependent and flexible on like your child and your situation. So that's kind of why it's like everywhere, but I hope this was a little bit helpful in terms of like getting things oriented. So let's talk a little bit about sleep training. Now, I will preface this by saying a lot of people have really strong opinions about this and they have lots of different ways of doing it. So I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You do what you're comfortable with, and I totally respect you not being comfortable with some things and people wanting to do it different ways. There's no one way to sleep train. I will say with children of trauma, generally the cry it out method is frowned upon. So I did not do the just let them cry situation. And I will say I was very, very lucky. My son came to me at 5 months, sleeping through the night, which I think was a combination of two things. Obviously, one, I think he probably was already used to sleeping through the night, which is very thankful and lucky for me. But two, I also invested a lot in making a really good sleeping environment. So I highly, highly, highly cannot recommend enough, if you have a baby or young toddler, getting blackout curtains, getting a white noise machine, and then, a safe, comfortable place for them to sleep. So I cannot recommend that enough. He had a blackout room with white noise that was loud enough to hear if you closed the door. And I really think that really helped him sleep when he first came to me. And I used to be a nanny, and when I sleep trained my nanny girls, same thing. They also had the blackout curtains and white noise, and really that has worked out really, really well. So I definitely recommend investing in those to help your baby sleep at night. Another thing you can do if you want to actually sleep train, I like to do, it doesn't really have a name, but I guess it's like a gentle cry it out method. So rather than just letting them cry themselves to sleep, you put them down to sleep and let them cry. If they're crying, then let them cry for 5 minutes. Then you go in and you reassure them, I'm here for you, I love you, I'm watching over you, I have not abandoned you, letting them know that you're there. You can stroke their head, pat their back, sing soothing songs to them. But the one thing I try not to do is pick them up, because I want them to learn that, now is sleep time, we stay in our crib, we're going to sleep, we're going to learn to self-soothe. And I'm here for you, but I'm not going to pick you up. Now, the exception to this is if the baby is completely losing it, just has gone off the wall, crossed over the edge, just screaming, then I will go ahead and pick them up, because at that point they need me to help calm them down because they have reached the edge. And once again, follow your gut feeling, follow what feels right to you. If this doesn't feel right to you, don't do it, that's fine. So once again, reassure that I was there, and then I would leave again. And if they were still crying, this time I would give them 10 minutes. And at the end of 10 minutes, if they had not self-soothed and gone to bed, I would walk in there again, once again, reassuring them, I'm there for you, I'm here for you, I've not abandoned you, I love you, but it's time to sleep. And this way, you're teaching them to self-soothe, because those periods that you leave, they're learning how to self-soothe themselves, but you're not leaving them for such extended periods of time that they feel like they've been abandoned, that they're getting emotionally distressed. It's kind of a gentler method. And you can expand this out as far as you're comfortable with if you want to do 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Studies show that more than 20 minutes of crying can be more detrimental, so I would definitely cut it off at 20 minutes tops. If you're not comfortable with 20 minutes, that's okay. Move it down to 10, 5, or don't do it at all. Do something different. And that's totally fine. That's just what I would recommend. That's what I've done when I've sleep trained babies in the past. And I like it because it is, like I said, teaching them to self-soothe, but still letting them know that you're there. And yeah, so that's kind of my gentle cry it out method, what I used. Some people, like I said, would rather just rock the baby to sleep every night, and I'm not sure exactly how those people ever get their toddlers to sleep in their bed alone, but if that method works for you, great, do it for you. This is just what works for me. So that's kind of how I approached sleeping and sleep training and setting a sleep schedule. Like I said, I got super lucky with my first placement, at least when he was younger, that he slept really, really well. So, it could really depend on your placement. My son is really not wanting to go to nap right now. He's talking at his door. I don't know if y'all can hear that from over there, but he's talking over there. Okay, so that is the feeding and sleeping schedule and kind of what I did to get ready for that and kind of have something to start with. I didn't want to get a baby in the middle of the night and have no idea where to start. So that kind of just gave me a framework to start with. I hope this was helpful and not too confusing. I know it was kind of all over the place, but I really just wanted to get some ideas out there about different things that you could do when you were sleep training and when you're setting a feeding schedule and having a new baby in your home. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. I will leave tons of links in the description below of different places y'all can check out and research you can do for yourself that might help you in this situation. If you have any great tips for other foster parents that you've used in the past that worked well, definitely leave it in the comments below too, so this can be a resource for everybody. And I will talk to you guys next time. Bye.